Faithful to the program laid down by his accomplice, while Louis watched at Oloron, Raoul remained in Paris with the purpose of recovering the confidence and affection of Madame Fauvel, and of lulling any suspicions which might arise in her breast. The task was difficult, but not impossible. Madame Fauvel had been distressed by Raoul's wild extravagance, but had never ceased to love him. Whatever faults he had committed, whatever future follies he might indulge in, he would always remain her best-loved child, her firstborn, the living image of her noble, handsome Gaston, the lover of her youth. She adored her two sons, Lucien and Abel, but she could not overcome an indulgent weakness for the unfortunate child, torn from her arms the day of his birth, abandoned to the mercies of hired strangers, and for 20 years deprived of home influences and a mother's love. She blamed herself for Raoul's misconduct, and accepted the responsibility of his sins, saying to herself, "It is my fault. But for me, he would not have been exposed to the temptations of the world." Knowing these to be her sentiments, Raoul did not hesitate to take advantage of them. Never were more irresistible fascinations employed for the accomplishment of a wicked object. Beneath an air of innocent frankness, this precocious scoundrel concealed wonderful astuteness and penetration. He could at will adorn himself with the confiding artlessness of youth, so that angels might have yielded to the soft look of his large dark eyes. There were few women living who could have resisted the thrilling tones of his sympathetic voice. During the month of Louis's absence, Madame Fauvel was in a state of comparative happiness. Never had this mother and wife, this pure, innocent woman, in spite of her first and only fault, enjoyed such tranquility. She felt as one under the influence of enchantment, while reveling in the sunshine of filial love, which almost bore the character of a lover's passion, for Raoul's devotion was ardent and constant, his manner so tender and winning, that anyone would have taken him for Madame Fauvel's suitor. As she was still at her country seat, and Emile Fauvel went into the city every morning at 9 o'clock, and did not return till 6, she had the whole of her time to devote to Raoul. When she had spent the morning with him at his house in Vézenet, she would often bring him home to dine and spend the evening with her. All his past faults were forgiven, or rather the whole blame of them was laid upon Clamaran, for, now that he was absent, had not Raoul once more become her noble, generous, affectionate son, the pride and consolation of her life? Raoul enjoyed the life he was leading, and took such an interest in the part that he was playing, that his acting was perfect. He possessed the faculty which makes cheats successful, faith in his own impostures. Sometimes he would stop to think whether he was telling the truth, or acting a shameful comedy. His success was wonderful. Even Madeleine, the prudent, distrustful Madeleine, without being able to shake off her prejudice against the young adventurer, confessed that perhaps she had been influenced by appearances, and had judged unjustly. Raoul not only never asked for money, but even refused it when offered, saying that, now that his uncle was away, his expenses were but trifling. Affairs were in this happy state when Louis arrived from Oloron. Although now immensely rich, he resolved to make no change in his style of living, but returned to his apartments at the Hôtel du Louvre. His only outlay was the purchase of a handsome carriage, and this was driven by Manuel, who consented to enter his service, although Gaston had left him a handsome little fortune, more than sufficient to support him comfortably. Louis's dream, the height of his ambition, was to be ranked among the great manufacturers of France. He was prouder of being called iron founder than of his marquisate. During his adventurous life, he had met with so many titled gamblers and cutthroats, that he no longer believed in the prestige of nobility. It was impossible to distinguish the counterfeit from the genuine. He thought what was so easily imitated was not worth the having. Dearly bought experience had taught him that our unromantic century attaches no value to armorial bearings, unless their possessor is rich enough to display them upon a splendid coach. One can be a marquis without a marquisate, but it is impossible to be a forge master without owning ironworks. Louis now thirsted for the homage of the world. All the badly digested humiliations of the past weighed upon him. He had suffered so much contempt and scorn from his fellowmen, that he burned to avenge himself. After a disgraceful youth, he longed to live a respected and honored old age. His past career disturbed him little. He was sufficiently acquainted with the world to know that the noise of his coach wheels would silence the jeers of those who knew his former life. These thoughts fermented in Louis's brain as he journeyed from Pau to Paris. He troubled his mind not in the least about Raoul, determined to use him as a tool so long as he needed his services, and then pay him a large sum if he would go back to England. All these plans and thoughts were afterward found noted down in the diary which he had in his pocket at the time of the journey. The first interview between the accomplices took place at the Hotel du Louvre. Raoul, having a practical turn of mind, said he thought that they both ought to be contented with the result already obtained, and that it would be folly to try and grasp anything more. "What more do we want?" he asked his uncle. "We now possess over 1,000,000, let us divide it and keep quiet. We had better be satisfied with our good luck, and not tempt Providence." But this moderation did not suit Louis. "I am rich," he replied, "but I desire more than wealth. I am determined to marry Madeleine, I swear she shall be my wife. In the first place, I madly love her, and then, as the nephew of the most eminent banker in Paris, I at once gain high position and public consideration. I tell you, uncle, your courtship will involve you in great risks." "I don't care if it does. I choose to run them. My intention is to share my fortune with you, but I will not do so till the day after my wedding. Madeleine's fortune will then be yours." Raoul was silent. Clamarin held the money, and was therefore master of the situation. "You don't seem to anticipate any difficulty in carrying out your wishes," he said discontentedly. "How are you to account for your suddenly acquired fortune?" "M. Fauvel knows that a Clamarin lived at Oloron, and had money in his bank. You tell him that you never heard of this person bearing your name, and then, at the end of the month, you come and say that you have inherited his fortune. People don't inherit fortunes from perfect strangers, so you had better trump up some relationship." "You are an innocent youth, nephew, your ingenuousness is amusing." "Explain yourself." "Certainly. The banker, his wife, and Madeleine must be informed that the Clamarin of Oloron was a natural son of my father, consequently my brother, born at Hamburg, and recognized during the emigration. Of course, he wished to leave his fortune to his own family. This is the story which you must tell Madame Fauvel tomorrow." "That is a bold step to take." "How so?" "Inquiries might be made." "Who would make them?" "The banker would not trouble himself to do so. What difference is it to him whether I had a brother or not? My title as heir is legally authenticated, and all he has to do is to pay the money he holds, and there his business ends. I am not afraid of his giving trouble." "Do you think that Madame Fauvel and her niece will ask any questions?" "Why should they? They have no grounds for suspicion. Besides, they cannot take a step without compromising themselves. If they knew all our secrets, I would not have the least fear of their making revelations. They have sense enough to know that they had best keep quiet." Not finding any other objections to make, Raoul said, "Very well, then, I obey you, but I am not to call upon Madame Fauvel for any more money, am I?" "And why not, pray?" "Because, my uncle, you are rich now." Suppose I am rich, replied Louis, triumphantly, what is that to you? Have we not quarreled about the means of making this money? And did you not heap abuse upon me until I consider myself justified in refusing you any assistance whatever? However, I will overlook the past. And, when I explain my present plan, you will feel ashamed of your former doubts and suspicion. You will say with me, success is certain. Louis de Clamerin's scheme was very simple, and therefore unfortunately presented the strongest chances of success. We will go back and look at our balance sheet. As heretofore, my brilliant nephew, you seem to have misunderstood my management of this affair. I will now explain it to you. I am listening. In the first place, I presented myself to Madame Fauvel, and said not, your money or your life, but your money or your reputation. It was a rude blow to strike, but effective. As I expected, she was frightened, and regarded me with the greatest aversion. Aversion is a mild term, uncle. I know that. Then I brought you upon the scene, and, without flattering you in the least, I must say that your opening act was a perfect success. I was concealed behind the curtain, and saw your first interview. It was sublime. She saw you, and loved you. You spoke a few words and won her heart. And but for you? Let me finish. This was the first act of our comedy. Let us pass to the second. Your extravagant follies, your grandfather would have said, your dissoluteness soon changed our respective situations. Madame Fauvel, without ceasing to worship you, you resemble Gaston so closely, was uneasy about you. She was so frightened that she was forced to come to me for assistance. Poor woman! I acted my part very well, as you must confess. I was grave, cold, indignant, and represented the distressed uncle to perfection. I spoke of the old probity of the Clamerins, and bemoaned that the family honor should be dragged in the dust by a degenerate descendant. For a short time I triumphed at your expense. Madame Fauvel forgot her former prejudice against me, and soon showed that she esteemed and liked me. That must have been a long time ago. Louis paid no attention to this ironical interruption. Now we come to the third scene, he went on to say, the time when Madame Fauvel, having Madeleine for an adviser, judged us at our true value. Oh! You need not flatter yourself that she did not fear and despise us both. If she did not hate you, Raoul, it was because a mother's heart always forgives a sinful child. A mother can despise and worship her son at the same time. She has proved it to me in so many touching ways, that, yes, even I, hardened as I am, was moved, and felt remorse. Parbleu! I have felt some pangs myself. Where did I leave off? Oh, yes. Madame Fauvel was frightened, and Madeleine, bent on sacrificing herself, had discarded Prosper, and consented to marry me, when the existence of Gaston was suddenly revealed. And what has happened since? You have succeeded in convincing Madame Fauvel that you are pure, and that I am blacker than hell. She is blinded by your noble qualities, and she and Madeleine regard me as your evil genius, whose pernicious influence led you astray. You are right, my venerated uncle, that is precisely the position you occupy. Very good. Now we come to the fifth act, and our comedy needs entire change of scenery. We must veer around. Change our tactics? You think it difficult, I suppose? Nothing easier. Listen attentively, for the future depends upon your skillfulness. Raoul leaned back in his chair, with folded arms, as if prepared for anything, and said, I am ready. The first thing for you to do, said Louis, is to go to Madame Fauvel tomorrow, and tell her the story about my natural brother. She will not believe you, but that makes no difference. The important thing is, for you to appear convinced of the truth of what you tell her. Consider me convinced. 5 days hence, I will call on Emile Gaboriau, and confirm the notification sent him by my notary at Oloron, that the money deposited in the bank now belongs to me. I will repeat, for his benefit, the story of the natural brother, and ask him to keep the money until I call for it, as I have no occasion for it at present. You, who are so distrustful, my good nephew, may regard this deposit as a guarantee of my sincerity. We will talk of that another time. Go on. Then I will go to Madame Gaboriau, and say, being very poor, my dear madam, necessity compelled me to claim your assistance in the support of my brother's son, who is also yours. This youth is worthless and extravagant. Thanks, my good uncle. He has poisoned your life when he should have added to your happiness. He is a constant anxiety and sorrow to your maternal heart. I have come to offer my regrets for your past trouble, and to assure you that you will have no annoyance in the future. I am now rich, and henceforth take the whole responsibility of Raoul upon myself. I will provide handsomely for him. Is that what you call a scheme? Parbleu, you will soon see whether it is. After listening to this speech, Madame Gaboriau will feel inclined to throw herself in my arms, by way of expressing her gratitude and joy. She will refrain, however, on account of her niece. She will ask me to relinquish my claim on Madeleine's hand, now that I am rich. I will roundly tell her, no. I will make this an opportunity for an edifying display of magnanimity and disinterestedness. I will say, Madam, you have accused me of cupidity. I am now able to prove your injustice. I have been infatuated, as every man must be, by the beauty, grace, and intelligence of Emile Madeleine, and I love her. If she were penniless, my devotion would only be the more ardent. She has been promised to me, and I must insist upon this one article of our agreement. This must be the price of my silence. And, to prove that I am not influenced by her fortune, I give you my sacred promise, that, the day after the wedding, I will send Raoul a stock receipt of 25,000 livres per annum. Louis expressed himself with such convincing candor, that Raoul, an artist in knavery, was charmed and astonished. Beautifully done, he cried, clapping his hands with glee. That last sentence will create a chasm between Madame Gaboriau and her niece. The promise of a fortune for me will certainly bring my mother over to our side. I hope so, said Louis with pretended modesty. And I have strong reasons for hoping so, as I shall be able to furnish the good lady with excellent arguments for excusing herself in her own eyes. You know, when someone proposes some little, what shall we call it, transaction to an honest person, it must be accompanied by justification sufficient to quiet all qualms of conscience. I shall prove to Madame Gaboriau and her niece that Prosper has shamefully deceived them. I shall prove to them that he is cramped by debts, dissipated, and a reckless gambler, openly associating with a woman of no character. And very pretty, besides, by Jove. You must not neglect to expatiate upon the beauty and fascinations of the adorable gypsy, that will be your strongest point. Don't be alarmed, I shall be more eloquent than a popular divine. Then I will explain to Madame Gaboriau that if she really loves her niece, she will persuade her to marry, not an insignificant cashier, but a man of position, a great manufacturer, a marquis, and, more than this, one rich enough to establish you in the world. Raoul was dazzled by this brilliant prospect. If you don't decide her, you will make her waver, he said. Oh! I don't expect a sudden change. I only intend planting the germ in her mind. Thanks to you, it will develop, flourish, and bear fruit. Thanks to me? Allow me to finish. After making my speeches I shall disappear from the scene, and your role will commence. Of course your mother will repeat the conversation to you, and then we can judge of the effect produced. But remember, you must scorn to receive any assistance from me. You must swear that you will brave all privation, want, famine even, rather than accept a cent from a base man whom you hate and despise, a man who— but you know exactly what you are to say. I can rely upon you for good acting. No one can surpass me when I am interested in my part. In pathetic roles I am always a success, when I have had time to prepare myself. I know you are. But this disinterestedness need not prevent you from resuming your dissipations. You must gamble, bet, and lose more money than you ever did before. You must increase your demands, and say that you must have money at all costs. You need not account to me for any money you can extort from her. All you get is your own to spend as you please. You don't say so. If you mean that, you will hurry up matters, I'll be bound. I can promise you, no time shall be wasted. Now listen to what you are to do, Raoul. Before the end of 3 months, you must have exhausted the resources of these 2 women. You must force from them every franc they can raise, so that they will be wholly unable to procure money to supply your increasing demands. In 3 months I must find them penniless, absolutely ruined, without even a jewel left. Raoul was startled at the passionate, vindictive tone of Louis's voice as he uttered these last words. You must hate these women if you are so determined to make them miserable, he said. I hate them, cried Louis. Can't you see that I madly love Madeline, love her as only a man of my age can love? Is not her image ever in my mind? Does not the very mention of her name fire my heart, and make me tremble like a schoolboy? Your great devotion does not prevent you planning the destruction of her present happiness. Necessity compels me to do so. Nothing but the most cruel deceptions and the bitterest suffering would ever induce her to become my wife, to take me as the lesser of 2 evils. The day on which you have led Madame Fauvel and her niece to the extreme edge of the precipice, pointed out its dark depths, and convinced them that they are irretrievably lost, I shall appear and rescue them. I will play my part with such grandeur, such lofty magnanimity, that Madeline will be touched, will forget her past enmity, and regard me with favorable eyes. When she finds that it is her sweet self, and not her money, that I want, she will soften, and in time yield to my entreaties. No true woman can be indifferent to a grand passion. I don't pretend to say that she will love me at first, but, if she will only consent to be mine, I ask for nothing more. Time will do much, even for a poor devil like myself. Raoul was shocked at this cold-blooded perversity of his uncle, but Clamarin showed his immense superiority in wickedness, and the apprentice admired the master. You would certainly succeed, uncle, he said, were it not for the cashier. Between you and Madeline, Prosper will always stand, if not in person, certainly in memory. Louis smiled scornfully, and, throwing away his cigar, which had died out, said, I don't mind Prosper, or attach any more importance to him than to that cigar. But she loves him. So much the worse for him. 6 months hence, she will despise him, he is already morally ruined, and at the proper time I will make an end of him socially. Do you know whither the road of dissipation leads, my good nephew? Prosper supports Gypsy, who is extravagant, he gambles, keeps fast horses, and gives suppers. Now, you gamble yourself, and know how much money can be squandered in one night. The losses of baccarat must be paid within 24 hours. He has lost heavily, must pay, and has charge of a money safe. Raoul protested against this insinuation. It is useless to tell me that he is honest, that nothing would induce him to touch money that does not belong to him. I know better. Parbleu! I was honest myself until I learned to gamble. Any man with a grain of sense would have married Madeline long ago, and sent us flying bag and baggage. You say she loves him. No one but a coward would be defrauded of the woman he loved and who loved him. Ah, if I had once felt Madeline's hand tremble in mine, if her rosy lips had once pressed a kiss upon my brow, the whole world could not take her from me. Woe to him who dared stand in my path. As it is, Prosper annoys me, and I intend to suppress him. With your aid I will so cover him with disgrace and infamy, that Madeline will drive every thought of him from her mind, and her love will turn to hate. Louis's tone of rage and vengeance startled Raoul, and made him regard the affair in a worse light than ever. You have given me a shameful, dastardly role to play, he said after a long pause. My honorable nephew has scruples, I suppose, said Clamoran sneeringly. Not exactly scruples, yet I confess. That you want to retreat? Rather too late to sing that tune, my friend. You wish to enjoy every luxury, have your pockets filled with gold, cut a fine figure in high society, and remain virtuous. Are you fool enough to suppose a poor man can be honest? 'Tis a luxury pertaining to the wealthy. Did you ever see people such as we draw money from the pure fount of virtue? We must fish in muddy waters, and then wash ourselves clean, and enjoy the result of our labor. I have never been rich enough to be honest, said Raoul humbly, but I must say it goes hard with me to torture two defenseless, frightened women, and ruin the character of a poor devil who regards me as his best friend. It is a low business. This resistance exasperated Louis to the last degree. You are the most absurd, ridiculous fool I ever met, he cried. An opportunity occurs for us to make an immense fortune. All we have to do is to stretch out our hands and take it, when you must needs prove refractory, like a whimpering baby. Nobody but an ass would refuse to drink when he is thirsty, because he sees a little mud at the bottom of the bucket. I suppose you prefer theft on a small scale, stealing by driblets. And where will your system lead you? To the poorhouse or the police station? You prefer living from hand to mouth, supported by Madame Fauvel, having small sums doled out to you to pay your little gambling debts. I am neither ambitious nor cruel. And suppose Madame Fauvel dies tomorrow, what will become of you? Will you go cringing up to the widower, and implore him to continue your allowance? Enough said, cried Raoul, angrily interrupting his uncle. I never had any idea of retreating. I made these objections to show you what infamous work you expect of me, and at the same time prove to you that without my assistance you can do nothing. I never pretended to the contrary. Then, my noble uncle, we might as well settle what my share is to be. Oh! It is not worthwhile for you to indulge in idle protestations. What will you give me in case of success? And what if we fail? I told you before. I will give you 25,000 livres a year, and all you can secure between now and my wedding day. This arrangement suits me very well, but where are your securities? This question was discussed a long time before it was satisfactorily settled by the accomplices, who had every reason to distrust each other. What are you afraid of? Asked Clamoran. Everything, replied Raoul. Where am I to obtain justice, if you deceive me? From this pretty little poniard? No, thank you. I would be made to pay as dear for your hide, as for that of an honest man. Finally, after long debate and much recrimination, the matter was arranged, and they shook hands before separating. Alas! Madame Fauvel and her niece soon felt the evil effects of the understanding between the villains. Everything happened as Louis had arranged. Once more, when Madame Fauvel had begun to breathe freely, and to hope that her troubles were over, Raoul's conduct suddenly changed. he became more extravagant and dissipated than ever. Formerly, Madame Fauvel would have said, "I wonder what he does with all the money I give him." Now she saw where it went. Raoul was reckless in his wickedness. He was intimate with actresses, openly lavishing money and jewelry upon them. He drove about with 4 horses, and bet heavily on every race. Never had he been so exacting and exorbitant in his demands for money. Madame Fauvel had the greatest difficulty in supplying his wants. He no longer made excuses and apologies for spending so much. Instead of coaxingly entreating, he demanded money as a right, threatening to betray Madame Fauvel to her husband if she refused him. At this rate, all the possessions of Madame Fauvel and Madeleine soon disappeared. In 1 month, all their money had been squandered. Then they were compelled to resort to the most shameful expedients in the household expenses. They economized in every possible way, making purchases on credit, and making tradesmen wait. Then they changed figures in the bills, and even invented accounts of things never bought. These imaginary costly whims increased so rapidly, that Emma Fauvel one day said, as he signed a large check, "Upon my word, ladies, you will buy out all the stores, if you keep on this way. But nothing pleases me better than to see you gratify every wish." Poor women! For months they had bought nothing, but had lived upon the remains of their former splendor, having all their old dresses made over, to keep up appearances in society. More clear-sighted than her aunt, Madeleine saw plainly that the day would soon come when everything would have to be explained. Although she knew that the sacrifices of the present would avail nothing in the future, that all this money was being thrown away without securing her aunt's peace of mind, yet she was silent. A high-minded delicacy made her conceal her apprehensions beneath an assumed calmness. The fact of her sacrificing herself made her refrain from uttering anything like a complaint or censure. She seemed to forget herself entirely in her efforts to comfort her aunt. "As soon as Raoul sees we have nothing more to give," she would say, "he will come to his senses, and stop all this extravagance." The day came when Madame Fauvel and Madeleine found it impossible to give another franc. The evening previous, Madame Fauvel had a dinner party, and with difficulty scraped together enough money to defray the expenses. Raoul appeared, and said that he was in the greatest need of money, being forced to pay a debt of 2,000 francs at once. In vain they implored him to wait a few days, until they could with propriety ask M. Fauvel for money. He declared that he must have it now, and that he would not leave the house without it. "But I have no way of getting it for you," said Madame Fauvel desperately. "You have taken everything from me. I have nothing left but my diamonds. Do you want them? If they can be of use, take them." Hardened as the young villain was, he blushed at these words. He felt pity for this unfortunate woman, who had always been so kind and indulgent to him, who had so often lavished upon him her maternal caresses. He felt for the noble girl who was the innocent victim of a vile plot. But he was bound by an oath. He knew that a powerful hand would save these women at the brink of the precipice. More than this, he saw an immense fortune at the end of his road of crime, and quieted his conscience by saying that he would redeem his present cruelty by honest kindness in the future. Once out of the clutches of Clamaran, he would be a better man, and try to return some of the kind affection shown him by these poor women. Stifling his better impulses, he said harshly to Madame Fauvel, "Give me the jewels, I will take them to the pawnbrokers." Madame Fauvel handed him a box containing a set of diamonds. It was a present from her husband the day he became worth 1,000,000. And so pressing was the want of these women who were surrounded by princely luxury, with their 10 servants, beautiful blooded horses, and jewels which were the admiration of Paris, that they implored him to bring them some of the money which he would procure on the diamonds, to meet their daily wants. He promised, and kept his word. But they had revealed a new source, a mine to be worked. He took advantage of it. One by one, all Madame Fauvel's jewels followed the way of the diamonds, and, when hers were all gone, those of Madeleine were given up. A recent lawsuit, which showed how a young and beautiful woman had been kept in a state of terror and almost poverty, by a rascal who had possession of her letters, a sad case which no honest man could read without blushing for his sex, has revealed to what depths human infamy can descend. And such abominable crimes are not so rare as people suppose. How many men are supported entirely by stolen secrets, from the coachman who claims 10 louis every month of the foolish girl whom he drove to a rendezvous, to the elegant dandy in light kids, who discovered a financial swindle, and makes the parties interested by his silence, cannot be known. This is called the extortion of hush money, the most cowardly and infamous of crimes, which the law, unfortunately, can rarely overtake and punish. Extortion of hush money, said an old prefect of police, is a trade which supports at least 1,000 scamps in Paris alone. Sometimes we know the blackmailer and his victim, and yet we can do nothing. Moreover, if we were to catch the villain in the very act, and hand him over to justice, the victim, in her fright at the chance of her secret being discovered, would turn against us. It is true, extortion has become a business. Very often it is the business of loafers, who spend plenty of money, when everyone knows they have no visible means of support, and of whom people ask, what do they live upon? The poor victims do not know how easy it would be to rid themselves of their tyrants. The police are fully capable of faithfully keeping secrets confided to them. A visit to the Rue de Jerusalem, a confidential communication with a head of the bureau, who is as silent as a father confessor, and the affair is arranged, without noise, without publicity, without anyone ever being the wiser. There are traps for master extortioners, which work well in the hands of the police. Madame Fauvel had no defense against the scoundrels who were torturing her, save prayers and tears. These availed her little. Sometimes Madame Fauvel betrayed such heartbroken suffering when Raoul begged her for money which she had no means of obtaining, that he would hurry away disgusted at his own brutal conduct, and say to Clamarin, "You must end this dirty business, I cannot stand it any longer. I will blow any man's brains out, or fight a crowd of cutthroats, if you choose, but as to killing by agony and fright these two poor miserable women, whom I am really fond of, I am not going to do it. You ask for more than I can do. I am not quite the cowardly hound you take me for." Clamarin paid no attention to these remonstrances, indeed, he was prepared for them. "It is not pleasant, I know," he replied, "but necessity knows no law. Have a little more perseverance and patience, we have almost got to the end." The end was nearer than Clamarin supposed. Toward the latter part of November, Madame Fauvel saw that it was impossible to postpone the catastrophe any longer, and as a last effort determined to apply to the Marquis for assistance. She had not seen him since his return from Oloron, except once, when he came to announce his accession to wealth. At that time, persuaded that he was the evil genius of Raoul, she had received him very coldly, and did not invite him to repeat his visit. She hesitated about speaking to her niece of the step she intended taking, because she feared violent opposition. To her great surprise, Madeleine warmly approved of it. Trouble had made her keen-sighted and suspicious. Reflecting on past events, comparing and weighing every act and speech of Raoul, she was now convinced that he was Clamarin's tool. She thought that Raoul was too shrewd to be acting in this shameful way, ruinously to his own interests, if there were not some secret motive at the bottom of it all. She saw that this persecution was more feigned than real. So thoroughly was she convinced of this, that, had it only concerned herself alone, she would have firmly resisted the oppression, certain that the threatened exposure would never take place. Recalling, with a shudder, certain looks of Clamarin, she guessed the truth, that the object of all this underhand work was to force her to become his wife. Determined on making the sacrifice, in spite of her repugnance toward the man, she wished to have the deed done at once. Anything was preferable to this terrible anxiety, to the life of torture which Raoul made her lead. She felt that her courage might fail if she waited and suffered much longer. "The sooner you see M. de Clameren the better for us, Aunt," she said, after talking the project over. The next day Madame Fauvel called on the Marquis at the Hôtel du Louvre, having sent him a note announcing her intended visit. He received her with cold, studied politeness, like a man who had been misunderstood and had been unjustly wounded. After listening to her report of Raoul's scandalous behavior, he became very indignant, and swore that he would soon make him repent of his heartlessness. But when Madame Fauvel told of the immense sums of money forced from her, Clameren seemed confounded, as if he could not believe it. "The worthless rascal," he exclaimed, "the idea of his audacity! Why, during the last 4 months, I have given him more than 20,000 francs, which I would not have done except to prevent him from applying to you, as he constantly threatened to do." Seeing an expression of doubtful surprise upon Madame Fauvel's face, Louis arose, and took from his desk some receipts signed by Raoul. The total amount was 23,500 francs. Madame Fauvel was shocked and amazed. "He has obtained 40,000 francs from me," she faintly said, "so that altogether he has spent 60,000 francs in 4 months. "I can't imagine what he does with it," said Clameren, "unless he spends it on actresses." "Good heavens! What can these creatures do with all the money lavished on them?" "That is a question I cannot answer, madam." He appeared to pity Madame Fauvel sincerely. He promised that he would at once see Raoul, and reason with him about the shameful life he was leading. Perhaps he could be persuaded to reform. Finally, after many protestations of friendship, he wound up by placing his fortune at her disposal. Although Madame Fauvel refused his offer, she appreciated the kindness of it, and on returning home said to Madeleine, "Perhaps we have mistaken his character, he may be a good man after all." Madeleine sadly shook her head. She had anticipated just what happened. Clameren's magnanimity and generosity confirmed her presentiments. Raoul came to see his uncle, and found him radiant. "Everything is going on swimmingly, my smart nephew," said Clameren. "Your receipts acted like a charm." "Ah, you are a partner worth having. I congratulate you upon your success. 40,000 francs in 4 months. "Yes," said Raoul carelessly. "I got about that much from pawnbrokers." "Pasts. Then you must have a nice little sum laid by." "That is my business, uncle, and not yours. Remember our agreement. I will tell you this much, Madame Fauvel and Madeleine have turned everything they could into money, they have nothing left, and I have had enough of my role." "Your role is ended. I forbid you to hereafter ask for a single centime." "What are you about to do? What has happened?" "The mine is loaded, nephew, and I am awaiting an opportunity to set fire to it." Louis de Clameren relied upon making his rival, Prosper Berthemy, furnish him this ardently desired opportunity. He loved Madeleine too passionately to feel aught save the bitterest hate toward the man whom she had freely chosen, and who still possessed her heart. Clameren knew that he could marry her at once if he chose, but in what way? By holding a sword of terror over her head, and forcing her to be his. He became frenzied at the idea of possessing her person, while her heart and soul would always be with Prosper. Thus he swore that, before marrying, he would so cover Prosper with shame and ignominy that no honest person would speak to him. He had first thought of killing him, but, fearing that Madeleine would enshrine and worship his memory, he determined to disgrace him. He imagined that there would be no difficulty in ruining the unfortunate young man. He soon found himself mistaken. Though Prosper led a life of reckless dissipation, he preserved order in his disorder. If in a state of miserable entanglement, and obliged to resort to all sorts of makeshifts to escape his creditors, his caution prevented the world from knowing it. Vainly did Raoul, with his pockets full of gold, try to tempt him to play high. Every effort to hasten his ruin failed. When he played, he did not seem to care whether he lost or won. Nothing aroused him from his cold indifference. His friend Nina Gypsy was extravagant, but her devotion to Prosper restrained her from going beyond certain limits. Raoul's great intimacy with Prosper enabled him to fully understand the state of his mind, that he was trying to drown his disappointment in excitement, but had not given up all hope. "You need not hope to beguile Prosper into committing any piece of folly," said Raoul to his uncle. "His head is as cool as a usurer's. He never goes beyond a certain degree of dissipation. What object he has in view I know not. Perhaps, when he has spent his last Napoleon, he will blow his brains out. He certainly never will descend to any dishonorable act. As to tampering with the money safe entrusted to his keeping, we must force him on," replied Clamaran. "Lead him into extravagances, make Gypsy call on him for costly finery, lend him plenty of money." Raoul shook his head, as if convinced that his efforts would be vain. "You don't know Prosper, uncle. We can't galvanize a dead man. Madeline killed him the day she discarded him. He takes no interest in anything on the face of the earth. We can wait and see." They did wait, and, to the great surprise of Madame Fauvel, Raoul once more became an affectionate and dutiful son, as he had been during Clamaran's absence. From reckless extravagance he changed to great economy. Under pretext of saving money, he remained at Vézenet, although it was very uncomfortable and disagreeable there in the winter. He said he wished to expiate his sins in solitude. The truth was, that, by remaining in the country, he ensured his liberty, and escaped his mother's visits. It was about this time that Madame Fauvel, charmed with the improvement in Raoul, asked her husband to give him some employment. Emile Fauvel was delighted to please his wife, and at once offered Raoul the place of corresponding clerk with a salary of 500 francs a month. The appointment pleased Raoul, but, in obedience to Clamaran's command, he refused it, saying his vocation was not banking. This refusal so provoked the banker that he told Raoul, if he was so idle and lazy, not to call on him for money again, or expect him to do anything to assist him. Raoul seized this pretext for ostensibly ceasing his visits. When he wanted to see his mother, he would come in the afternoon, when he knew that Emile Fauvel would be from home, and he only came often enough to keep informed of what was going on in the household. This sudden lull after so many storms appeared ominous to Madeline. She was more certain than ever that the plot was now ripe, and would suddenly burst upon them, without warning. She did not impart her presentiment to her aunt, but prepared herself for the worst. "What can they be doing?" Madame Fauvel would say. "Can they have ceased to persecute us?" "Yes, what can they be doing?" Madeline would murmur. Louis and Raoul gave no signs of life, because, like expert hunters, they were silently hiding, and watching for a favorable opportunity of pouncing upon their victims. Never losing sight of Prosper for a day, Raoul had exhausted every effort of his fertile mind to compromise his honor, to ensnare him into some inextricable entanglement. But, as he had foreseen, the cashier's indifference offered little hope of success. Clamaran began to grow impatient at this delay, and had fully determined to bring matters to a crisis himself, when one morning, about 3 o'clock, he was aroused by Raoul. He knew that some event of great importance must have happened, to make his nephew come to his house at this hour of the morning. What is the matter? He anxiously inquired. Perhaps nothing, perhaps everything. I have just left Prosper. Well,